new to me. I mean, I had come across them in researching my prior diagnoses of chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, but didn't really know a lot about Lyme disease at that point. And so we were able to confirm those microbial issues based on other more conventional testing. As you know, none of the testing is great, so we have to repeat some of them. That got me really interested in Dr. Dietrich Klinghart's work and energy medicine and autonomic response testing and so on. And so he really became a primary mentor of mine at that time. And it was also around that same time in 2005 that Richie Shoemaker's book, Mold Warriors, was released. And so I had the diagnosis of Lyme disease in July 2005. I picked up that book, Mold Warriors, in December of 2005. And it really took me some time to explore the mold piece. At that point, I really felt like I had a pretty clear understanding of what was wrong, finally having the Lyme and co-infection type diagnoses. The issue of mold was one that I was aware of from the perspective of living in an apartment at that time that had pipes that had broken and air conditioning that had leaked into a closet and visible mold that was growing. But there really wasn't a voice out there at that time that was saying, hey, this can actually cause health problems in humans. And so I think, you know, a debt of gratitude to Richie Shoemaker for being the first voice that I came across that really said, hey, this is a significant issue. And so I worked with several practitioners then to start exploring things further. 15 years ago, our understanding of this condition, which is now called CIRS, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, was really still in its infancy. After I got his book, then in 2006, 2007, I started exploring it further, started doing some testing, started doing ERMIs, started doing...
You know, by the way, that's when we met at the ACAM in 2006, when I went there to meet with with Richie Shoemaker at that time, and that's when we met, because I was impressed. There weren't a lot of patients who showed up to ACAM meetings.
Yeah, I actually do enjoy going to the meetings. So, you know, in 2006, 2007, we were still exploring it with things like immunoglobulins to see if somebody maybe had allergy to mold. The ERMI test was available. And so in 2007, it became clear that mold was a piece of the puzzle for me, but how large a piece at that point was still not really clear. I did eventually get confirmation that the environment was not safe for my recovery. I broke my lease. I moved within a couple of months in 2008. And I would say at this point, my perspective really is that mold is probably, or was probably, the bigger issue in terms of my ability to recover from Lyme. I feel like the mold exposure may have also been what kind of set the stage for me to, you know, not be able to deal with those Lyme infections. And so I really urge people that are dealing with chronic Lyme, which is very real, to prioritize making sure that the external environment is safe and optimal for our recovery. There's so many different connections to mold that people often don't think about.
Yeah, you know, and just looking back at your symptoms, the amount of vestibular, you know, the amount of balance and brain issues that you had is something that would now, you know, retrospectoscope would now make us put the mold possibility, the mycotoxin issue, higher, because that's the kind of, you know, that really is a toxic flavor.
Right. Yeah, and things like, you know, the internal vibrations, the internal tremors that you can't really see. I mean, we know now that those are primarily mold and or Bartonella, both of which were factors that I was dealing with. And so I agree, there were a lot of clues that it just took time to have people like Dr. Shoemaker and yourself and others to bring this information out so we could start kind of connecting the dots back to this.
Yeah, you know, I mean, just an aside, it's what's amazed me as I've been doing this summit is realizing that, you know, we were treating, I mean, one of the first things I was exposed to, even in the 1980s, was Dr. Crook's book about Candida, you know, and I've mentioned this several times because I'm kind of kicking myself, is that why didn't I put the pieces together sooner, you know, because we saw what Candida could do, and obviously it was Candida was what we identified, because in those days we just didn't have, people weren't as aware of as many other molds that could be causing problems. but it's just interesting that that was there, and the symptoms were there, and yet I like to think I put everything together, but we didn't. You know?
Yeah, that's amazing that these people have obviously read Dr. Shoemaker's books, and yet they still haven't put the pieces together. I mean, Mold at Ground Zero for Holmes' 1988 chronic fatigue syndrome is in 4 of Dr. Shoemaker's books. Were these chapters completely ripped out of their copies of the books? They've never seen this in any of the blogs or any of the information online. As far as they've gotten, they think that mold causes chronic fatigue. Talk about not putting the pieces of the puzzle together. There doesn't seem to be any way to get them to do so.